Welcome to the Shine Away podcast. I'm joined today by the DeSoto High School wrestling coach, Javier Vieyra. May have messed that last name up, and if so, sorry, Coach Javi. He has been the DeSoto Wildcats wrestling coach since 2002. He also, in 2023, took on the venture of being the freshman football coach for the Wildcats. In January of 2024, he was awarded the Making a Difference Award from the from USD 232 Education Foundation. He wrestled in college at Augustana University, and then he is a Salina South Cougar alum. He was a 4-time Kansas State qualifier, 3-time Kansas State runner-up, 5-time Fargo Nationals placer, and a 3-time Fargo Nationals runner-up. And he is married to Marina. Welcome, Coach Javi.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Let's just jump right into where you started, Salina South. As I mentioned, doing some research about that, I have family that are alums of Salina South, the Blake family, obviously, and they also own, in my opinion, the best barbecue joint in the world, Hickory Hut Barbecue there in Salina. That's my Uncle Dale, and now my cousin Tim and Wes's venture, and I would put that up there with them. People up here may not agree with that, but anyway, so that was really cool when I found out that you were from Salina South. And now I have some cousins that go there, my cousins' kids go there, and so it's good school. So obviously you wrestled growing up. That's your background. What other sports did you play?
A little bit of everything. Growing up, it was soccer, football. I would say I dabbled in baseball. I don't know if I was ever good enough to say I played. But then about middle school time period, I kind of realized probably a little too small for the football side of things. And I think it was my freshman fall was the last time I played a sport that wasn't wrestling. So
I grew up in Minneapolis, Kansas, just up the road, and we had the main sport options. We didn't have soccer, which my sons play, and my daughter, which I would have played growing up had I had the opportunity, because I was, my son James, and he is a spitting image of what I look like in high school, about 5'9", 5'10", and rail thin. And since we didn't have soccer, I played football. I wasn't very good, but I played. And it's a no-cut sport, so I didn't get cut. So going through that time, you're dabbling in some sports. Obviously, you're starting to figure out that wrestling's your best sport. Were there specific coaches that kind of piqued your interest in future coaching?
Yes and no. I'm super grateful for the coaches I had in Salina, Gary Seibel at Salina South, and then Rich Zimmerman and Bobby Stein have always been around the kids club and Salina. But in no disrespectful way to them, I don't think I knew I wanted to coach until I got to college, until I really started just running some of the freestyle Greco club stuff at Augie and really starting to build those relationships for the first time. And as a college kid, it doesn't feel like that, it's just teaching people wrestling. And then just from that little experience of SMI is what we called it, that's when I really put my foot in the door as far as like, maybe I don't want to be a chiropractor. Maybe I want to be a teacher and be able to coach in the future.
Talking about your time up in South Dakota, correct?
Correct, yep.
Another piece of interesting information, my older brother, Shane Blake, wrestled there. And many years before you, 1988, I think, was when he went there as a freshman. And as I was texting him, I said, hey, it's really cool. I'm going to get to talk to Coach Javi. He's from Salina South, I've been in Salina many, many times from being from Minneapolis. And he went to the same school for college as you. And so he started texting, and then he said, your coach must have been Jason Reitmer?
Yep, Jason Reitmeyer, yep.
And he's like, yeah, my roommate dated his sister. Look at that connection.
It's funny you say that, because moving back to Kansas, it was like nobody would ever know of little Division II Augustana. And I think in the last 3 years, the connections I've made back there are just countless, and it's just a small world.
So you mentioned when you got to college is kind of where it really sparked your interest into coaching. Was it, and I don't want to call him out if it wasn't, but was Coach Jason, or was there a specific coach up there, or was it maybe a teammate, somebody that, you leaned on for guidance starting your journey?
Sure. I was super appreciative of Reitmeyer and then Tom Meester. He was the assistant coach, and now he's a high school coach up there in Brandon Valley, which is just outside of Sioux Falls. But again, it was just that experience of feeling the power of running the club up there. I got involved not just in Augie's off-season club, but there's a local town up there called Harrisburg, and a few of us wrestlers would coach out there together. And it was just such a great feeling to go out there with six of your buddies, spend, your Tuesday, Thursday evenings with anyone from 6-year-old to sixth grader, and watch them have those victories, whether it's literal winning of matches or just, learning new positions. It was just from that very beginning experience of actually diving in and being responsible and feeling invested in the kids that really is when I decided, again, not to sound bad here because I love my job as teaching, but maybe I should be a teacher because I get a coach.
I've talked to a number of people on the podcast and also off that, well, the last guest I had, Matt Tinsley at Topeka Seaman, he said that he left the business world and went back and got a teaching degree for that very reason. He wanted to be a teacher, but he really wanted to coach high school basketball, and he felt that was the best avenue to do so consistently, be around the kids constantly. And so taking that further, is is that your why? To see kids, teach them something and then see them excel and do it over and over?
Yeah, it's a huge part. It's very rewarding to watch them do that. Um, I think it's Roby actually who I find myself picking his brain about 24/7, who said the ball always stops rolling or bouncing or something along those lines. Um, and I think for me, when I've talked with a lot of coaches recently, wrestling specifically, I think some of the better coaches maybe don't achieve what they want to in their wrestling career. And at least I'm hungry to help kids be better than what we were. And I think for me, coaching offered that opportunity. I had a very successful high school career, but left some big matches out there. And then in college, just never quite developed in a way that I would have hoped. And so when I first started coaching and seeing kids have those successes, again, just wanting them to be better than what I was or ended up as, and not having any regrets or what if moments, that is and was probably one of my biggest driving forces in the getting into coaching.
You've been at your time there, you've had a kid that I've enjoyed watching growing up. He's a classmate of James's, Emerson. And so I
Mhm.
was fortunate to be in Wichita during the state tournament last year. And unfortunately, in my opinion, he was the best at his weight class, and he just had a bad day and maybe unlucky because he had the bloody lip or bloody nose or something. It seemed like every time he started to get some momentum, it started bleeding and they stopped the match. And then he loses in overtime. How did you, after that, what do you do? I mean, in a team sport, it's never really just one kid, right? But in a wrestling, it's him.
Absolutely.
Turn left, he can't turn right. He can't blame you. He can't blame. At the end of the day, he's going to look inward and say, I failed to win the state championship. Even though the rest of his high school season was amazing. And then I think even afterwards, he did some amazing things. How do you not let that stick to him so he doesn't carry it into next year as a junior and senior, but even into the future?
Yeah. Well, and you're absolutely right. When it's an individual sport, it's so tough to process, especially in the moment. I don't think I said maybe more than 10 words to him that night after that match. for multiple reasons. A, he needs to process it, but B, he's such a hard worker. I don't really have to worry about him either. I think honestly, the only thing I said to him is keep your head up and that there's bigger matches ahead of you. And there absolutely, I mean, was even this summer. He went back to Fargo and All American, the toughest tournament in the nation for the second time, and he got it, and he gets it. He's such a workhorse that it's nice to not have to worry about one match defining his career. He's always looking for those challenges, which is, as a coach, something you want. Uh, it's probably the toughest thing to do in wrestling is wrestle in the off season and consistently find those high caliber matches. It's always good to get extra matches in. Emerson's the type of kid who always wants the best of the best. And so just keeping things at bay with him and understanding it's a state title, but national titles are cooler. And you have 2 more years to win a state title. And and like I said, he's rebounded really well. I don't think he's stopped wrestling since then. So it's a tough balance because you want them to be motivated from the loss, but you also don't want it to linger. So, um, yeah, like I said, kind of a delicate process.
When did the DeSoto Wildcats start the girls program? How long ago did you do that?
So, and honestly, I'm kind of confused on some of the timeline just because I wasn't here. I believe Keisha made or like passed it as a sport in 2021 separate from the boys. Or maybe it was 2020, but one of those 2 years. Honestly, we haven't had the girls' numbers to function under two separate entities. But my first year, we had one girl. Last year, we had 16 girls come out and try the sport. So we're getting to the point now where we are fighting tooth and nail to keep the staff together, to keep the varsity teams together, but also trying to be very mindful that they are two very different teams and the needs and the philosophies have to change depending on what athlete you're talking to.
Yeah, and that's where I wanted to go with that question was it seems to me if say Coach Roby took over both boys and girls programs at one time for the basketball, or Coach Rice did, and then the other one was out. So they had to handle not only their boys basketball team, but the girls basketball team. That's a lot. And like you said, early on, the numbers weren't there, so maybe it didn't seem to be as much.
Hmm. Hmm.
But there can't be much different than a high school boy and a high school girl. I mean, you
Absolutely.
both compete, they both do things, but they care about different things. Like they're just different. So
Hmm.
how
Hmm.
as a head coach have you handled that the last in a young head coach? Not to mention, is there somebody you've sought guidance from? Because this is a little. It's just hard. Boys and girls under one umbrella being coached. You're trying to teach the boys to do something. Maybe the girls aren't there. Anyway, I'll let you talk
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
that one's always confused me how that works.
Well, and it's probably as complicated for me to answer it as it maybe feels asking the question because I think different coaches have different opinions on this. I think you have some programs like Baser where Jay Johnson over there has done a phenomenal job growing that girls program and their numbers are just massive. But for us, we're like I strongly believe in working with what we have. To me, with where DeSoto's been for 3 years, or the 3 years I've been here, we're finally getting to the point where we probably have a varsity and JV split. But enough of our varsity wrestlers haven't maybe experienced high levels of national success like we just talked about with Emerson. Well, I think I'm a big believer and I think it's best to keep them together. I think the Emersons of the world need to see the girls dancing and singing to Party in the USA and know that there's a bigger piece of wrestling than just outworking people. And I think the girls benefit so much watching Emerson be a guy who's not going to back down from anyone in the wrestling room. And it doesn't matter if we're bleeding, like it makes you tougher and you got to push through those moments. So, I'm extremely lucky with the staff I have. They we've kind of adopted just the philosophy of a coach as a coach, and it doesn't matter if it's JV, varsity, boy, girl. You build a relationship, you help a kid with whatever they need. And so, anyways, wrestling being that individual sport, like I feel like the kids have really bought into there's a team culture piece, intensity piece, but they can take it as far as they want to. There's a saying that you get out what you get put into the sport, especially with wrestling. And I think that they know that there's just that balance of some days we need more singing and dancing, and some days we need more maybe tears and I don't want to say blood because we don't bleed that much, but sweat. We'll say that.
A couple of questions about your program because I've heard nothing but good things from people in the community
Thank you.
about
Thank
the
you.
program you're building. And I actually, I asked Cody Parks at Blue Guy Southwest, who's had a successful run right now at Southwest, about your program, and he spoke really high of you and what you're doing. He said you're doing it faster than he even expected, and so that's kudos to you and your staff.
Thank you.
One, being an individual sport, but you keep kind of going to Emerson. Obviously, we know how good he is and how hard he works. Does he just gravitate to being a leader for your program? Do you have to push some of your older kids last year and even this year into being that leader? Because it could be very easy for a guy like Emerson to be, I'm going to go get mine. I'm going to win my match and then I'm done. You know, I know it's
Mhm.
still a team and you want to get the team points, but there's going to be kids, I'm sure there has been kids that if I win my match, we lose the rest of them. It doesn't matter. I had a great day. And so how do you still build that team unity in such an individualized sport?
Sure. It's an ongoing process. I would say the thing I honestly am the most proud of when it comes to Emerson specifically is that leadership piece. I would say I saw a lot of that as a freshman of I can be a really good wrestler and I can focus on myself. And as a junior, I see a lot more of like, let's make sure people are doing the right thing. Let me take a second to teach somebody. And I think he had a lot of good role models to look back on these last few years. We've been very fortunate to really kind of turn a corner in the wrestling program the last few years pretty quickly. And some of the seniors, Casey Boland, Kimball Sweeney, they got a state medal, and but there's definitely leaders in Gabby Cheney and Dylan Roy and Caleb Van Boeven and Carson Jones who exemplified what the hard work also showed, just maybe not a state medal. And and so honestly, the team is just overly bought in, which is great, and just that team aspect and kind of the you need a tough wrestling room to breed tough wrestlers, and a lack of practice partners, a weak link can really just set people back and stop progress. And so going back to kind of the boys girls combo, like last year it was comical. There was so much jawing back and forth about who was going to have more qualifiers and who was going to place higher at regionals or do better at state. And it's just that competitiveness has naturally bred itself in our room. And again, that's a huge credit to the alumni who bought in when I got to DeSoto. But now it's really been awesome to watch the younger kids who are now all kind of juniors. They're no longer super young, but they've really done a good job of stepping up. Even a few seniors who maybe haven't had a lot of varsity experience. I've never felt more confident in what we've returned, which says a lot. for what we lost last year and how we ended our season on some pretty high notes.
The healthy balance you talked about there between the boys and girls programs where they're challenging each other, they're competing against each other. That internal competition, I know as a basketball coach, I love nothing more than when the two best players go head to head in a scrimmage or something and challenge each other, push each other. And it sounds like you had that going, not just between the boys over here and the girls over here, but hey, we're going to get more state qualifiers than you guys. And so kind of that pushing each other, which is always good and healthy. What are some of the things you do? You know, you started coaching freshman football. How do you take from that to wrestling and wrestling to that as a coach? How do you kind of try to marry what you do on one to the other? Obviously, there's similarities, and I know every football coach would love all their kids to wrestle, and vice versa. All football coaches would love to have a team full of wrestlers because they're tough and they're willing to do what they need to do to get it done. So, how do you marry the two of them?
Sorry, I'm a student. Just there you go. Uh, honestly, don't get me wrong, football is exhausting. It's a huge time commitment. But I thoroughly enjoy it. And honestly, I couldn't ask for a better person to learn from than Brian King. Um, I would say when I first got to the Soto and I was just coaching wrestling, I don't know if it's maybe me being overzealous or just a first year head coach. I think just efficiency was a real challenge. And I think Coach King and Thamer and Gaslam and all the football coaches are just hyper efficient. And so for me, like it's been awesome to learn from them about practice structures and kind of just more of the philosophies um, of just breaking stuff down. And then on the wrestling side of things, I would say I've probably seen the biggest transformation in my own coaching in the last year and a half or 2 years, just going to all the Team Kansas national level stuff, being around best coaches in the state and at times nation, and being able to walk around and see how they coach has really transformed what I focus on. And not to keep referencing all the other podcast guests, but I think it was Cody Parks who talked about positioning over moves. And that's been a real philosophy change for me is I don't need and I don't want my wrestlers to know a million wrestling moves. I just want us to know how to stay in good positioning 24/7. And if you can maintain your what I tell them is like the 80%, there's not the big highs and there's not the big lows. Like you just maintain an above average position and energy and effort, and you kind of miss out on some of those big emotional waves, which often changes how kids wrestle. So anyway, so long answer there, but they've both really played off each other, and every year about this time I sit down and I just write out on my whiteboard like how can I continue to merge the two different philosophies and adapt and improve. So
That's really good of you to understand going to the football side and saying, okay, this is a different sport, but these guys have been doing it for a long time successfully. And so a lot of young coaches come in thinking they have it all, they know it all. Here's exactly what I want to do, and then they realize, okay, I like this direction, but I need to fine tune some things and to learn from Coach King and Coach Gaslam and Coach Thamer and even counterparts at other schools, like you referenced, Cody Park, just anybody that you can kind of take a little bit and make it your own.
mhm,
That's really good for any coach to do at any level, whether it's a 20-year guy or a 5-year guy or girl, anything. Obviously, the goal for every kid is to win a state championship. That's why they want to wrestle, right? And if you could hand those out, you would.
for sure.
But one thing you can impact is how are they off the court, off the mat, and what can they take with them after they hang up their shoes. So what are you trying to instill in them so that when they graduate, whether they wrestle in college or not, but as they go become parents and work with their kids, maybe teach it or coach at a wrestling club or something, what do you hope they take from this?
You know, with wrestling, it's always credit to the work ethic because wrestling's just such a physically, emotionally, mentally demanding sport. The best way I can summarize it is I always just try to get the kids to be the best version of themselves. They might tell you different verbiage of this, but I tell them I don't want you to be mediocre people. I want you to be the best version of yourself, and whether that's a state champion wrestler or a two-time or two-sport athlete who maybe doesn't ever step on a wrestling varsity mat, but you're doing it, make yourself a better football player, better future father, husband, wife, whatever the role is. Just being the best version of himself is really what the goal is for me, at least. Wrestling, again, is just such a tough sport. I don't try to echo too many life lessons. I think the sport teaches them that within itself, just continuously encouraging them um, to evolve and be the best versions is really the conversations that we have probably pretty much daily.
The life lessons you can take from any sport, I have found, is one of the best ways to learn. And kids got to be open to it. And, you could talk to them all the time about life lessons, life lessons. They're probably going to hear a few of them, but they're not going to stick. You go through something,
Yeah.
then it will stick, and you'll be like, "Say, this is what I was talking about." Say, "Hey, here's what we can do," and then you can lean on that. Um, we talked earlier about how you handled the loss for Emerson, and I assume
Mhm.
when you lose a big match, whether it's Emerson or anyone, you have to handle it a little different because not everybody's going to be built like Emerson, and some people will take it one way and another. Flipping that though, you're heading into the state tournament. I think do you have 20 kids there or something like that last year, boys and
Yeah, 10
girls?
boys and 10 girls.
Yeah, which is kudos to you guys. That's awesome.
Thank you.
How do you get them prepared for that throughout the year so it doesn't seem so big and overwhelming? I know as you go through the state tournament, and then I guess the second part of that question is, you want to get them pumped up and everything, but how do you keep them also not getting over, I don't know, just overhyped?
Yeah, man, it is not to keep using the phrase delicate balance, but that's the toughest time of the year. I'm asking, assistant coaches, picking brains of other coaches, thinking back to my own high school, college career, what it looked like as we got towards the end of the season. But throughout the year, we really just stress the kids. Like at the end of the day, their December and January are meant to be their toughest months. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how many losses you have. Everyone's name on a state bracket has the same chance to win a state title or state medal or score points or whatever the goal is for that kid. And so all year long, the message is pretty simple. We don't care about wins till February. And the kids have really bought into that aspect of things. And every year I've been here, we kind of ramp up our schedule a little bit more and more. And I think that they know and have the more success they've had, they've bought into it's okay to have a few losses, especially with our tournaments just being tougher. And so as the year goes on, I think that they know that it's okay to lose, and everything's kind of a trial run until state and regions. In fact, when we go down to Newton for the ginormous tournament down there, we stay at the same hotel. We keep the kids on the same regiment, and like we tell them, this is your practice run for the state tournament. And so they've done a really good job of buying into that process and being okay with losing, learning from their losses and seeking out those losses. And then as we get towards the end of the season, it's all about reminding them that it's fun. And that's where, again, like I love having the girls in the wrestling room because uh, when the boys are kind of maybe starting to hang head towards the end of January and like we're beat up, the girls are really good about smiling and singing and dancing. And so we start to back off and taper our practices and play games. But really, it's just trying to find what they need on that given day. And, every year I go back as we get towards the end of the year and I look at what we did the year ahead. year before, and I try to stick to it, but there's some days I walk in the room and I'm like, nope, we need to change the music playlist, or we need to start with a game today, and just really trying to read the energy levels of the room because it's tough towards the end of January. Even us coaches can feel how long the season has gotten, and we're not the ones cutting weight, getting beat up. So just constantly looking and evaluating is really what I felt like we've been very lucky about the last few seasons. I think our kids have responded and peaked at the right times of the year. It's been a few fun regionals and state tournaments here.
You mentioned that talking to kids and getting them to buy in the fact that, hey, it's the first month or two of wrestling season. It's okay to lose. When you were saying that, are you having them try particular things? You talked about your positioning. Are you having them work on stuff to the point where, hey, this may cause you to lose this match, but if you work on this and get better at, if you face this particular person again, you'll beat them? Or, or is like, I guess,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
in football, you can work on certain things, but that you only have 8 games, so you're not going to take that approach. Whereas in
hmm
wrestling, you
hmm
go to regionals and you could be 0 and whatever, and then just start to roll because you've worked on everything so much.
yeah. I wouldn't say we put kids in a position to, I wouldn't say intentionally lose. Like we never put them in a spot where we're going to increase their chances to lose. But the fun part about wrestling is you get to decide your style. You get to decide what you feel the most comfortable with, and that's probably what you repetition in the room the most. And so getting them to understand that December and January is your time to figure out what you do the best and what areas we really need to attack to improve. Um, getting a kid like Lincoln Turner, who is one of probably the hardest wrestlers we have on the team, to understand that he's got some areas that we need to focus on, especially with positioning. Um, and when we get a breakdown film and actually show them, like, hey, this is what you did well. This is something we need to work on. The kids have just done a really good job with understanding that there's no hiding behind film. It's you and another person out there, and your body isn't where it's supposed to be, or your weight's not where it's supposed to be, or your head, or whatever the case is. And they don't really get to argue with that. And so they're really good about learning though from the matches. To a fault, they always want to watch film and talk with coaches, but just again, figuring out what they do best, figuring out their biggest areas to improve, and then attacking those like crazy during those December, January weeks.
I like that approach that we're preparing for the end. I know basketball coach Rice and coach Roby, when I've ever talked to them, that they want to win every game going to the sub-state and regionals and state and everything, but you want to work on and be playing your best at the end. So it
Yeah,
sounds like you take that similar approach, that you want to be wrestling your best the last month of the season and not the first month of the season.
absolutely. And I think some coaches maybe would disagree with hyping up the state tournament because you don't want to cause nerves and stuff. But we've just our kids have bought into the fact that, like, because we work so hard in December and January, they're prepared, and now there is no stress because you're at your best performance. You do what you do the best. We've worked on the areas you needed to improve at, and now it's just time to go have fun and let wrestling take care of itself.
The idea of individual sport versus team sport. So you're a coach of both right now. Which one's harder for a kid?
You know, I don't know. This is tough. My answer might change if it was in wrestling season, but I think the individual sport is just toughest. Like we've said, you have no one to blame. And I think in team sports, you have people you can sometimes hide behind, you know? It's been amazing to watch DeSoto's football success, and I would argue that we don't maybe have the greatest athletes in the state, but there's a system that works and they're bought in and they're a good team together. And again, no discredit to anyone, coach, football player on that team, but there's some kids who maybe don't play a significant amount who get to be part of that success, which is great. And I love that. But, we have some kids on the wrestling mat who maybe win 2 matches a season, and it's really tough for them to understand their value, even though their value is so huge in the wrestling room because they don't see the wins and losses. And so um, I think the individual part's the toughest because if you're not winning matches, it's really tough to end the season or come back out your sophomore, junior year, or just continue wanting to be part of that, even if your teammates are having sex.
How do you keep the confidence of a kid that's really struggling? Say he or she goes their first 10 matches of the season and goes over. So how do you build that confidence? Obviously it's through the hard work and just continuing to watch film and everything, but what do you as a coach try to do to instill the confidence in them that they need? Because it is one-on-one. Like in a team sport, I can play my role and hopefully this buddy over here can take over and really carry us this game, or this buddy over here can carry us. And when you're 0 and 10, I imagine that first win seems so hard to get.
Yeah. Um, the thing that I always try to tell the kids is I always try to drop back to where they were at the beginning of the year. We've had a lot of kids in my 4 years um, who don't start wrestling till their freshman year or till their sophomore or junior, senior year. And so it's their first season. And it's tough when you're watching your teammates have success to, why not me? Why am I not winning my matches? But usually when we drop back to, hey, a month ago, you thought the idea of wrestling was like never going to happen for you. And now you're taking people down, maybe just not winning matches. Or, your first 10 matches, you made it 20 seconds at a time. And by 15th match, you're in the third period of matches. And showing them the small victories, I think, has helped a lot. It's just, again, an ongoing challenge. One of the probably better examples of a kid is probably one of honestly our just hardest workers I've had here is Carson Jones. And I can't remember the stats now, but I always used to harp on him pretty loudly. And he was a good kid, and I he was a good leader, so I knew he could take it. But he had very few wins the year before I got here, and even that junior senior year, I don't know how many matches he won, but he ended up as a two-time state qualifier. Him and I had a lot of good conversations about that throughout the year, keeping our confidence and believing in the hard work aspect. But it's been really helpful, I think, for some of those younger guys who were in the room with him to see that where he was as a sophomore to where by the time he left as a senior, and just understanding it's not just a November to February process, but it's really a 4-year process, and hoping that they understand that they are getting better and they just got to put in their time.
That's a really cool story. And I mean, that actually exemplifies the question I asked perfectly. Not a whole lot of success early, but you still made it to state twice. And so that's
Mhm.
really cool. I know you're doing this in the middle of the day. And so I want to jump over to some quick hitters.
Sure.
So these are just your opinion. And so I don't care what anybody else thinks on your answers. So
Okay.
give
Okay.
me the some of the all-time Kansas high school wrestlers, the best you've ever seen.
Oh boy. The first guy comes to my mind, not because he's from Salina South, but just in the years since then, I don't think I hear this conversation without hearing Bo Manus get brought up. Kansas' first four-time state champion, never taken down. Just I remember watching him being from Salina and understanding how good he was when I didn't know a thing about wrestling. Fun fact, he actually gave me my first wrestling shoes that are sitting in my office at my house. Um, but maybe a little biased as well as a diehard OU fan, but gosh, I don't even know. There's been so many greats, and I've been out of the state for 10 years, and I know there's a lot of really good wrestlers to come through Kansas. Maybe not the depth as other states. There's a lot of greats.
You wrestled in college. I'm assuming you watch the college NCAA and everything. Who are some of the best in your opinion?
You know, I'm trying to not tiptoe around these, but it's just so tough because with weight classes, that always gets brought up. What does success look like for a little guy versus a heavyweight? Um, recently I'd be crazy not to say Gable Stevenson, Yanni Diaz, Vito Ruja. When I was in college, though, we were lucky enough to get to watch David Taylor and Kyle Dake wrestle, and both those guys and Jordan Burroughs, arguably maybe up there with John Smith, would be probably the Mount Rushmore of college wrestling. I'd have to imagine most people would say. So I'll end with that.
You said you're an OU fan.
Yeah. Oh, big time.
Let's just cancel everything we're doing right now.
Yeah.
No, just kidding. Uh, who's got the best college wrestling program in college?
Oh, it's not close. It's Penn State. I couldn't tell you the years, the runs they've been on, the scoring records, but David Taylor, who I mentioned being out at Okie State now, I would say they're building, and Cornell to do what they do. They're always competitive, but Penn State is the closed doors everyone wants in, and everyone's trying to figure out the secret sauce, what their practices look like, and they're just so dominant. And it's tough to argue anything else.
All right, two more. I'm gonna throw one at you that you haven't prepared for, and then this one first. Can you beat Emerson in a one-on-one wrestling match?
I think that's the number one question I always get. Funny story. I was Emerson's primary practice partner last year, I would say, when Casey Bullen broke his wrist or broke his hand in football. Um, I would be honest on air and say he has just gotten too big for me now. His weight addition is all muscle. My weight addition as I get older is not muscle. So we still scrap here and there, but yeah, he is officially too big for me. He is now Coach Hoover's problem.
Yeah, I mean, I watch him run the ball as a fullback and tackle as a linebacker, and I would probably have 20 to 30 pounds of not muscle weight on him as well, and I wouldn't mess with him.
Yeah.
This one is I've seen some clips on the various social media of big time wrestling wins where the wrestler then runs over to the coach and tries to throw them or throws them. First of all, is that a true celebration that people do? And has anybody attempted that on you yet?
I think it is for sure a real celebration. I think it usually stems from a premeditated conversation. Um, can honestly say no one's ever tried it on me, and I hope the kids know to never try that on me, because I just don't want to ever volunteer myself to be thrown like that. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's comical. It's to each their own. It's just not for me.
I watched it the very first time. It was a few years ago when I first saw the clip, and he did it. And the coach initially popped up like he was not very happy, but then I think it was just part of the ruse. And I was like, holy cow, being a basketball guy, that's just nuts. But anyway, well, I appreciate all your time and thank you for coming on. And I love what you're doing with both the boys and girls program there at DeSoto and the freshmen. Like I said, I just got to watch you coach the freshmen, and you got a good group this year. And so I wish you nothing but the best this season in wrestling and finishing out the football season.
Well, thank you. And again, like I appreciate the opportunity to come speak in general, but specifically about wrestling because it usually doesn't get to happen very often.